Welcome to the History Makers Leadership Podcast, where we explore the transformative journey that is leadership. Each episode, we will dive deep into strategies, stories, insights, and the core values that shape and inspire effective Christian leaders who make an impact all around the globe. This podcast is brought to you by the International Leadership Institute. Get ready to unlock your leadership potential, and let's change history together.
So last time we talked about internal change, right? That can be within a team or even personally within our own hearts, minds, souls. How do we handle external change? Meaning there's things that come from the outside that are just forced upon us. I mean, how do we deal with that as leaders? How do we deal with external forces and change?
I think really understanding that difference is what you just said. The first thing is you got to understand that difference. You got to understand that some change is thrust upon you, right? It's maybe, maybe trying to host a church gathering in my city, in my nation is now no longer legal. And so what is that? I mean, I didn't have any control over that. It was thrust upon me. So I've got to respond to that change. Maybe you're in business and all of a sudden your suppliers no longer carry that product, right? That was something a lot of organizations and businesses dealt with during the pandemic, was these supply chain shortages. And so when we have these external changes thrust upon us, something that requires us to make a change because of those circumstances and situations, I think one of the first things we need to do is to get with our team, get with the people that are leading alongside us, and begin to think through that proper response. I think as a leader, sometimes we can be a little quick to react and not careful to respond. And I think having a common framework in thinking about what leadership looks like and how to lead in these moments, I think that's essential to leading your team well, to respond to an external change versus just reacting and making maybe even an impulsive decision. The funny thing is, TJ, a lot of times leaders are really good at those impulsive decisions. And the dangerous thing is many times it works out. Right? Many times it works out. Many times the impulsive, like the natural instinct of the leader's thinking is the right call. But what's dangerous about that is when you have that external change thrust upon you, what it actually creates in your team is a sense of uncertainty, a sense of insecurity, right? And so suddenly what you actually need to do is, and we've talked about this before, you've got to increase the amount of trust your team has with you. And by increasing that trust, you help to bridge the gap of those insecurity and those feelings of insecurity. And when you've done that, you create the opportunity to lead them into that response. And so by inviting that core team with you into that conversation, by bringing them together and having that common language of leadership, that common response to this external situation, you're really positioning yourself for better long-term success versus just going with your gut instinct and running after it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. So kind of like connecting that idea that you're talking about earlier too, of having that framework, of having things already, core values already set in place, right? That help you to know how to navigate in situations where you might want to be impulsive, right? You can come back to the drawing board and say, what do we already know about ourselves as an organization, right? These are the things that are important. That will help us to navigate through this. And I think what you're saying that's really helpful is like, there's lots of people that want that consistency, right? And if it's already there and they know like, okay, these are our values that we're going to utilize to lead through change, that I think that really helps with trust as well too. It's like, okay, they're not always like, obviously there's times that you need to just make a decision, right? And leaders are there for that. But there's also times it's like, hey, let's step back. What is the organizational goal, right? And usually that comes through having a protocol, I guess you could call it.
Sure.
Or something of the sort.
I think to the leader out there right now, one of the best tips I could give you is to think through the change before you have to make the change. Sometimes these external challenges, these external difficulties, these pressures for external change come upon you, but you could have prepared ahead of time. And TJ, I think one that's really a great example is if you are leading in your church, in your nonprofit, in your business, and you anticipate an economic shift, right? Maybe there's going to be an economic downturn in your location, in your region. Maybe there's going to be currency inflation or just, again, external things that you don't have control over, right?
Right.
You're leading your church. You don't have control over the fact that, well, suddenly your currency cannot buy as much power as it used to. So the lights are harder to keep on, whatever that circumstance is. But if you and your team have talked through some of those things ahead of time, it's really going to position you for greater success, because it's always difficult in the moment to think through those circumstances with all the emotion and all the pressure. And now you've got a limited time that you're trying to work within, right? But if you have the chance to just brainstorm those things ahead of time, it's really going to help. And, you know, the classic kind of example that comes to my mind is in my home, right? If there's a fire in my house, my family knows what we're going to do, right? We've talked through that situation. Hey, we're going to walk out to the mailbox at the end of our property, right? We're going to all walk out and get to that point. That's where we're going to meet up. And we've talked through those things. Now, my house has never been on fire, by God's grace. But we had that conversation before the house was on fire, because guess what? Once the house is on fire, I can't have that conversation in that moment.
The time to have the conversation.
Right. And so to the leaders out there, I would just say, when you know that there's certain change that's going to be thrust upon you, upon your organization, when you can see those winds changing, when you can see that tide coming in, begin planning ahead of time, right? Don't be in a position where you haven't considered those things with your team in a safe space, in an open conversation before it was needed. And I think that's probably one of the biggest advices I could offer to a leader who's thinking through, what does change look like when it's being, you know, thrust upon us. Let's plan ahead of time.
Yeah. Have it all planned out. One other aspect that I think was really interesting about this topic, it's not always that the things that come at us are negative things. They can be positive things, right?
That's a good
like
point.
there can be lots of change, external change, like having a baby or something.
Yeah.
And you mentioned here at ILI, one of the core values that we believe is family priority.
Yeah.
So can you just explain that a little bit more, what you're talking about?
Sure.
About how we can have that framework, even on the good external changes that come into our life.
Yeah, I think, you know, you're right, TJ. Not all change that's external is going to be bad, right? I've been talking from that perspective because those are sometimes the most emotionally charged things.
And they're obvious.
Sure. I mean, absolutely. We do. But I think it's important to remember there can be incredibly good change that just gets thrust upon you, right? And so leading in that moment, what's so valuable and important, again, is this common language of leadership, right? So using the example of family priority, if one of your team is in the midst of having a child, right? Well, that's a celebratory thing. That's a good thing. You didn't have anything to say in that. That was a decision that they made. But now you and your team are reacting to that. Well, you've got the opportunity in the midst of those external, thrusts. You've got the opportunity to make sure that you and the team are thinking through leadership in the same way, right? Just like you want to have a common vision, you want to have a common toolbox of leadership principles and values that help you to lead from a common perspective. And so in that case, you might say, hey, family priority is the right response here, right? We teach that one of the 8 core values is family priority. We believe that the family is God's building block for society. If we believe that, that's going to impact the way that we lead ourselves, that we lead our teams, and it's going to provide our team with a framework and a confidence to know how to respond to external change, right? In military practices, there's often this idea of commander's intent, right? In the midst of battle, there's all these things that can happen, but you need to know what the commander's intent is, because you have the freedom to make some decisions, but you've got to make sure that the commander's intent is achieved. And I think the same is true in the way that we lead. We need to make sure that we're giving some of that freedom to be able to respond to those external changes, especially when things are happening at a fast pace. But when your team has that common language of leadership, there's a common way to think and to problem solve and to use those leadership tools in a way that's going to help you and your team respond not only with unity in a common common framework of thinking, but no, but the same foundational set of what matters most.
The top dog,
so,
but you're kind of
everyone's
got
to understand.
And all of these external
they just had a baby.
We're causing lots of change.
We're not going to pressure them right now.
What should somebody in the
most
middle
important
do?
thing in his life?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, TJ, because a lot of times as leaders, right, and leaders just are people who have influence, right? So as a person with influence within an organization, you're not always that senior leader. You're not always in that key decision-making position. And so if you're not in that position, I think one of the first things you need to do as a leader is to begin to lean into and exercise trust as it's been earned by those senior leaders, right? In the midst of change, when that external change is being thrust upon you and the team and the organization, when that's happening, those key leaders, they've got a lot going on, right? They've got a lot that they're juggling in their head. They've got a lot that they're juggling in their heart. They're trying to figure things out. And so one of the first things I'd suggest is lean into that trust, begin praying for that leader, begin saying, Lord, give them discernment, give them wisdom, give them understanding. You want to be supporting them in that process because, that's a hard spot to be in, right? And I think it's important in those moments to also be leaning into grace and understanding, hey, there are going to be decisions out of this that probably have errors that hindsight will point to as, hey, this could have gone better. But by leaning into grace, by leaning into trust, by prayerfully supporting that senior leader, I think you're going to first be positioning your own heart in the right place to be able to respond to those external pressures, but also position yourself to be in a place to support, encourage, and ultimately help accomplish the mission and vision that God's given to the organization and therefore to you as well.
So what I kind of hear you saying is lead by being led. Like there's people above you, trust them, right? They've been put in that place.
Right.
And in the same way that you need to hopefully have that trust from the people below you, you place that in others. And that's kind of how we can lead from the middle.
Yeah,
well,
I think that's a really great way of putting it, is lead by being led. Allow yourself to be led. And I think that can be helpful. I think another thing is, again, in the midst of lots of external change, right? Things that are being thrust upon you, it can be easy to feel like in your seat, you have a perspective that is true and accurate and represents the whole image. And what I mean by that is a lot of times, when change is being thrust upon, you're going to see how that change is impacting you, your role, your position. You might even have the privilege of knowing enough about the larger organization, the larger business, the larger church body to see how that's going to impact beyond just you. But I think it can be important to remember and reflect on how the change isn't just impacting you, but impacting across the whole organization, right? Kind of run through these exercises. Something I like to do a lot is run through the mental exercise of, if you were the senior leader, right? What would you do? Right? If there wasn't someone else that you could, push the problem up to, right? If the buck had to stop with you, right? If the decision had to be made in your hands, and to kind of walk through that mental exercise and to think about that, to feel that weight. And I think there can be a lot of value to that. Another thing, though, that I would say is as you're going through those perspectives, remember to balance this. Don't bring problems to the leaders above you. Bring proposed solutions. Right? Okay. In the midst of massive external change, right? Lots of pressures. Man, as a senior leader, TJ, I know you've been in this position. You just feel the weight, man.
You do.
You feel all that pressure. You feel all of that need to make those decisions. You're trying to see best. You're trying to prayerfully discern. You're really carrying a lot of that. And if somebody comes with another problem, you might sit there and just go, I knew that was a thing. That's just not the problem I'm solving right now. I got to solve this problem.
Yeah.
Right. But if instead you come as just a person who's kind of in the middle there, who's carries influence and is able to actualize change, to actually produce a valuable response to the change that's coming. When you're in that kind of a position, when you come with solutions, you say, hey, here's my proposed solution. I'm going to respond with some grace here. I'm not coming saying this is exactly how it has to be, but I observed this is one of the changes that we'll need to make because of this external impact. Here's my proposed solution to that. Help me.
Yeah.
Right. I feel like my experience, you're going to receive a lot better response than if you just come saying, hey, I see another thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to be the guy on the boat who's just pointing to all the holes where the water's flooding in.
Like,
you're not helpful.
We're drowning.
I can see the holes. I can see the water filling in.
Yeah.
I need somebody who's helping to put their fingers in the holes and mud over it and keep everything working. And so I think that's another thing that again, you're not in that senior leader role, but you see that change coming and impacting you. Man, definitely be a person who comes bringing solutions. Be a person who's full of grace and lean into spiritually supporting through prayer, through encouragement. That senior leader as they try and navigate that, because it's a hard thing to navigate.
It's a hard thing. It reminds me of put yourself in their shoes. Mm-hmm. Play that hypothetical game, right? Of, man, what would it be like to be in their position? And then how can I help them by providing solutions to the observations that I'm seeing? Right. That's really a way that you in the middle can lead. Mm-hmm. Like, okay, I need to take responsibility and provide a solution for my superior in this situation. So we've learned a ton about how to deal with and lead through external changes. Do you have any closing remarks that you would want to say?
Yeah, I would just say this to the leaders who are here. As you're trying to navigate leading through that external change, there's going to be difficulties. There are going to be pressures. There's going to be maybe it's a positive external change, right? There's going to be opportunity for growth, opportunity for an increased clarity, increased effectiveness in accomplishing the mission and vision that God's given you. There's a lot of ways that change can bring change to your organization, and to be prepared for that, you've got to prepare your heart. You've got to prepare your mind. You have to provide you and your team the necessary tools and resources to help them lead effectively. As a leader, one of your primary jobs should be multiplying leadership into the lives of others, right? We cannot lead alone. We cannot be a one-man band. We've got to be a kind of leader who is mobilizing and multiplying leadership into the hands of those who surround us. So if you want to be that kind of leader, but you're looking to figure out how to go through that journey, I want to encourage you. We've talked about this before, but check out the International Leadership Institute. We've got a 25 plus year history of walking alongside leaders, helping them to multiply effective biblical leadership principles into the lives of other people. At the end of the day, we want to see the gospel accelerate to the ends of the earth. We want to see effective men and women who are leading themselves, leading others, and ultimately reaching their nations with the gospel. Whether that's through your business, through your church, maybe a nonprofit, whatever your context for leadership, you need to be building other leaders. That's the only way the vision and mission can be accomplished. So take a look at iliteam.org, learn a little bit about who we are and what we do. And I believe that God can use our relationship, the resources that exist with us to help you accomplish your mission, your vision, and ultimately mobilize and multiply leadership into the lives of others. TJ, thank you so much for the opportunity to join you again, man. Yeah. I love talking leadership and helping leaders grow. And so I just so appreciate you leading this conversation, man.
It's always good, Daniel. I enjoy it every time, and let's just lead through change, right?
Yeah.
Let's not only lead through change, let's be the change as well, so that we can grow into the people that God would have us to be.
Amen.
Amen. Thanks.